Well, interesting question. I have a lot of objections to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration declares that we all have a human right to a job, an education, medical care, 2 weeks of paid vacation, and these days I think we should have a universal right to 3 weeks of paid vacation. I don't think those are rights. I think those are benefits, privileges, things you earn, things you pay for. Half of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about free speech and freedom from torture and things like that, I agree with. But I'm not sure that they add a whole lot to what the U.S. Constitution does. If we understood the U.S. Constitution, it gives us free speech and freedom of religion and freedom from torture and all of those things. So I guess my suggestion would be that first they teach the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And if everybody understood that, then I'd feel a lot more comfortable. And I might point out the Cato Institute is doing its part in that. We have mailed out over 1 million copies of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence recently. We think it would be great if everybody had one of those in their home and if there was one in every school. Now, you can go too far. Some conservative Republicans in New Jersey want to pass a law requiring that every student recite the key passage of the Declaration of Independence every day. They want to force the kids to stand up and say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men have certain unalienable rights, one of which is not deciding whether you will endorse this philosophy. I think it's reasonable to treat it. I think it's unreasonable to force people to say words that they may not agree with. Keith tells me we're out of time. I know we have another panel coming up, so thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you.
David is always an inspirational speaker, and he certainly was today. Thank you all for listening, and I would urge you to please move fairly rapidly across the hall so that you don't fall too far behind for the next panel. Thank you. Months ago when we held it here in D.C., you may remember that one of the issues we talked about then was basically this problem with kids and drugs and how it affects us politically. I have done this mea culpa before, but I should repeat it briefly here. I think probably the single largest mistake we made in the 1970s, and we made lots of them, and some of them have even been documented, probably the largest and biggest mistake we made was we failed to take serious the concern that millions of Americans have about drug policy and its potential adverse impact on their children. We thought the issue was, how should we treat adults who smoke marijuana in the privacy of their home? And on that issue, if that's the way the issue is framed, we win. We win in all the polls, we win when you talk to average Americans. But our opponents frequently, and as you know the drug czar, his answer to every single question is, it sends a wrong message to kids. And our private polling suggests that this is a message that still resonates fairly well with large segments of the American public. So our panel today will once again continue to try to address how do we help parents, American public, understand that marijuana prohibition is not a positive program to protect kids. The chair of the panel today is Dr. Marcia Rosenbaum, a medical sociologist and director of the Linda Smith Center West, a drug policy institution with offices in New York and San Francisco. She received her doctorate in sociology from the University of California at San Francisco in 1979. Since 1977, Dr. Rosenbaum has been the principal investigator on 10 grants funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. She has completed studies of women heroin addicts, methadone maintenance treatment and policy, MDMA or ecstasy, cocaine, and drug use during pregnancy. She is author of several books, including Women on Heroin, Just Say What, An Alternative View on Solving America's Drug Problems, Pursuit of Ecstasy, the MDMA Experience with Jerome Beck, Kids, Drugs, and Drug Education, a Harm Reduction Approach, Pregnant Women on Drugs, Combating Stereotypes and Stigma with Sheila Murphy, Safety First, a reality-based approach to teens, drugs, and drug education, as well as numerous scholarly articles about drug use, addiction, women, treatment, and drug policy. She has also written opinion pieces that have been published in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Oakland Tribune, the Chicago Tribune, the Detroit News, Newsday, and the San Diego Union Tribune. As director of the Linda Smith Center West, Dr. Rosenbaum works with the San Francisco District Attorney, the Department of Public Health, and the San Francisco Medical Society on the implementation of a harm reduction approach to criminal justice, drug treatment, and drug education. Recently, Dr. Rosenbaum co-chaired the international conference entitled Just Say No, K-N-O-W, New Directions in Drug Education. Dr. Rosenbaum lives in San Francisco. She has 2 children, a 21-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and 2 adult stepdaughters. Please welcome Dr. Marcia Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Keith. I've been a parent for almost 3 decades. I have 2 stepdaughters who are 34 and 32. I have a daughter who's almost 22 and a 16-year-old son. And I started to reflect on the last 3 decades of parenting and how it related to marijuana prohibition. And I was remembering that in the 1970s, when my stepdaughters were growing up and were children and then adolescents, that there were absolutely no admonitions whatsoever for parents around marijuana. You didn't hear anything. It was a non-issue. In fact, Dan Baum in Smoke and Mirrors tells a lovely history in which one parent, who in fact started one of the first anti-drug parent groups in the 1970s, wanted information about marijuana. So he called the federal government, he called the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and they referred him for information to NORML. So, Keith, I don't know whether you've come a long way or you went a long way, but they don't refer you to NORML anymore when you call the federal government for information about marijuana. Now, in the 1980s, when my daughter Annie, who's now 21, was growing up, one day she came home. She was a 5th grader at the time, and I realized she had taken, in fact, the DARE program. I hardly knew what it was, but it was as though in my own home there was a loyal soldier in the war on drugs who, frankly, startled me. I didn't know how to come back at her with the misinformation she was bringing home, but I could detect a sea change in the way parents were having to address the issue of marijuana and other drugs. Now, the 1990s and to the present, we all know there's been major changes in the way parents are looked at as people who are supposed to be working toward keeping our kids off drugs and away from marijuana. Specifically, we are supposed to talk to our kids about drugs. There are numerous ads that appear all the time in the paper, and they look like something like this: honesty, the anti-drug; parents, the anti-drug. So that as parents in the 90s, we are really responsible for our kids' status as preferably drug-free. And one of the dilemmas that parents today face is, in part of talking to our kids, what are we supposed to say? And the dilemma faced by, it's assumed that parents who are talking to their kids about marijuana don't use marijuana anymore. They either never did, or they did and they don't. And so the question is to talk to your kids about marijuana, and as one of the panelists earlier spoke about, well, what about that you did, it was a terrible mistake, and now you don't, and that's what you should tell your kids. But really the issue of honesty is a huge one out there, and a lot of parents can't figure out what to do, how to talk to their kids. And so I wanted to read you something, my favorite piece on how parents should talk to kids, and I hope that the writer for USA Today is still here. I don't see him. But I want to tell you, this piece was in USA Today. America's newspaper,